Hello, and welcome back to Touring My Minecraft World, Awesome World. In this episode, we're going to be exploring the Arts District, which is the second wave of buildings that I built in this Minecraft world. Once again, in the background, you're going to be hearing some soft indie hits to kind of keep the mood calm and relaxing. So, as a little recap from the previous episode, we had toured the entire old palace grounds. Now we're going to go into the new age and the new era of building. So, as we travel up over the old gardens, we're going to head across the river. Now, as you cross the river, that signifies us going into this new era where we're experimenting more with different architectural styles. The first building that we're going to come to is the art museum here. Now, this art museum I wanted to be very different than the other buildings that you see within this Minecraft world. I wanted it to almost feel jarring, but yet still feel like it sticks in. So when comparing it to the other buildings, you're going to see a lot more movement, a lot more circles, a lot bigger columns, and new stained glass techniques. The one major detail and thing that sticks out are these curvatures that highlight the entire top of the art museum, making perfect circles as you look at them. The other thing that you'll notice are these large column bases that almost look like mountains holding up a very small pillar. You'll notice a lack of a pillar in the middle of each of the different wings. That's done on purpose to make it feel even smaller, but also to make the windows feel larger. And then finally, well, I guess not finally, there's one other thing. You'll notice one large dome on top, bringing and tying back in that idea of domes from the new palace. Now finally, the thing that is subtle, but once you see it, it'll really stick out, is the entrance, is a face. You'll see the two eyebrows marked or symbolized by these circular crowns. Then you'll notice the eyes here, the nose here, and then finally the mouth. Some people consider that to be a mustache, but there's the mouth that you'll enter and the tongue that's sticking out. So it's almost like you're going to be swallowed and devoured by this art. This also is starting to introduce and play on this motif of eyes and the symbolism of eyes throughout the rest of the buildings. Why don't we enter the building now? The first room you'll be met with is this large lobby area where the art itself is this. You'll notice it's a small rainforest scene with baby bamboo shoots, some flowers, and large waterfalls coming from the top of the dome. The waterfalls almost signify the rain that would be occurring within the rainforest. And then also, what you'll notice is the water almost feels like pillars holding up this large dome, keeping it from collapsing in on the nature. Now, one thing that's interesting about this is in the previous buildings, in the old palace and the new palace, you'll feel as if there's large windows to make you still feel tied to nature, but the window is a wall or a barrier keeping you from it. But in this building, you'll see that the nature is actually inside the building and there are less windows and it feels less open. It feels a lot more like you're inside a building. Let's go up the stairs. Now that we're at the top of the stairs, we're going to be on the balcony where you can look down and see an aerial shot of the rainforest down below. This is the tallest part that you can get in this building. It also allows you to overlook the other wings and see the roof of the wings. We're not going to go down the stairs this time, we're just going to fall. So let's go over into the west wing. This is an art museum, so all of the paintings that you could possibly get in Minecraft are displayed here. They're on simple blocks that just show you the grandiose of these paintings while letting the large natural light in. You'll also notice that sea lanterns are still a very popular lighting form. As I want to show the clean light, I don't want any hues affecting how these paintings look, and instead I want just plain blue light. You'll also be able to see through the windows into the outside, into the swamps, the gardens, and then the mountains in the back that are finished, and that is as far as we'll expand in that area. There's also a fountain that the eyes are looking at from behind. Let's go into the other wing now. This wing is rather empty and is made more for when I feel inspired to make art, and is supposed to be for the Minecraft player themselves to make art. But one thing I really like about this room is the floor. A lot of art museums take a large amount of attention into the detail of the spaces that they are viewing these art pieces. So, in this one I wanted a floor that showed how luxurious and grandiose it was while also not being taking away or distracting from the art. So, I decided to go with a simple checkerboard pattern that is on a slant, and I think it went really well. The same pattern can be seen on the walls, but this time more simpler. The other thing that's interesting or different about this this art museum is this water fountain, which is the first time that I'm starting to play with the heights and really experiment with not having anything in the middle, so it feels more like a water being shot out than coming out of a well or anything. You'll also notice the height and how that all changes, creating this lovely arc. The other thing to show the attention of detail is each of these flowers were placed by hand, as I did not like how the bone meal put the flowers. You'll also notice that there's stained glass hiding all of the necessary lights, and that lights are also hidden in the trees to ensure that it is always bright inside. And if everything was achieved correctly, when you stare at this, you shouldn't notice the lights, which I don't believe you do. Now let's move on. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you the date. It was created sometime around 2020. It was constructed a little after the buildings over there were constructed, so I imagine early 2020. Now let's follow the paths. You'll notice a difference in the paths here, where the redstone lamps are now being covered by a trapdoor, hiding it more into these paths, so it doesn't feel like it sticks out as much. But you can still see the lamps on the outside here. Now, this brings us to our next building, the library. This library was for the longest time the largest building I built on this server. It is very large and takes up a full 2 maps. Now, this building I wanted to feel both classical but also modern and more Americanized. So you'll notice that you still have the large columns that you see on either side of the wings, as well as the background. But you will also notice this front facade here that looks a little more like a schoolhouse and a rural schoolhouse. Now let's go inside. So, inside you really see this idea of domes taking off. This building consists of 7 domes, 6 of the same size that are smaller, and 3 are in the front, 3 are in the back, and then 1 large dome. This, to date, is the largest dome in the Minecraft world. Now, this is also fully furnished, so you'll see that this is really where I start to experiment with furnishing and interior design, and really find my way as an interior designer using these darker colors and darker earthy tones. Let's take a moment to look up and see the dome. This dome is very large for its size. I don't quite remember how wide it is anymore, but it is very large and took most of the time when constructing it. You'll also notice that wood travels up, creating these arches, which is completely exact on every single corner, still keeping up with this idea that Minecraft is made of squares. You'll also notice a change in lighting, where instead of using the sea lanterns, I'm now using the nether lamps, or the worm lights, I believe they're called. You'll notice that all the lights are being hidden by these trap doors. And then even when on the ground, they're hidden by these trap doors, the same ones from outside. Blue here is used as an interesting color to show you where you can interact and what is for everyone. I also wanted it to feel more antique and older, even though you're inside a newer building. I wanted there to feel like it is very dingy and dark, hence why there's so many lights that are needed. You'll also notice a change in the pillars on the inside, where the pillars are no longer quartz, but instead they are now wood. I don't quite remember which wood I used, but the wood is consistent throughout the Minecraft world. I believe it is dark oak. You'll also notice this color of red carpeting. The red carpeting, I think, complements the books, the wood, and this blue very nicely, where it shows you where you can go. Another small detail that I like to look at is the miniature fish tank over here. While it's too small to have any fish live, I think it's a nice touch imagining somebody curled up. I also like the use of trap doors, as glass would take up a full block span. I will show you in depth into the library, where there's just rows and rows on books, just more and more coming out, as there's also these beautiful lanterns hanging from the balcony. If you go to the other side over here, you can get up to the balcony level by taking the stairs, once again following the red carpeting. As you go up, you can see the stairs. There's the same stairs on the other side as well. And there's more seating as well. Here you can get a better glimpse into these smaller domes, and even smaller domes. Now, let's go into the wings. We are now entering the east wing. To get into the east wing, you have to take a bridge that is covered, as there's a moat covering the main chamber. You'll see the same motif of these circles with the wood. And now you're into the east wing. One thing I like to point out is our lights here, with that same bow that you saw at the Art Museum's fountains. You'll see that this room feels a lot more brighter, as the wings are supposed to feel more modern and almost feel new. You'll notice that there is a lot more quartz showing on the walls, with the lanterns now being held up by white pegs, no longer fences. You'll see a large table for sitting, and that red carpet once again directing you where to go. Let's go down a little bit. You'll notice a wall where you can get up and sit at a raised seating area. All of the seating areas are raised from the ground, so you can get up. You'll notice a simple quartz floor guiding you around. Now, one thing you will notice is the lights are exposed from the bottom. That's because I felt like the lights looked and blended more well while they were unexposed than putting a trapdoor. I thought the trapdoor drew too much attention to the light itself, and the blue conflicted just a little too much on the wood. Let's go over to the other side. We're now entering the west wing again, crossing this bridge, and you'll notice that the bridge's floors are completely different. The top is the circle, but the bottom is a checkerboard. I wanted to do that so it didn't feel too similar and almost blend in as one. Now we are in the west wing. It has a similar vibe, so I'm not going to go too in depth. It's just a different layout. But one thing I do want to touch on is the lights. I wanted to note and show the difference between the two different wings. So I did that in the lighting. So in the other room, if you remember correctly, the lights bowed out, but here the lights bow in. And the side lamps here, which hang, are the same height as the ones in the middle. And the same goes for here, where it's the same on the end on the other side. The other thing I want to highlight, which ties into the historical view, is this map here. So at the time of building, this is all of the buildings that were built. So you can see the old palace grounds, and you can see then the library and the art museum, as well as the gardens that were built. I did go a little further and built other areas that you'll see soon. But for the most part, you have seen everything that is in this map here. You can also see what the land used to look like, the large mountains that are behind the new palace. You can see how there's still mountains behind the art museum, all of which have since been developed and turned into gardens. You can see that the gardens on the west side of the old palace are complete, one thing that took a very long time to do. And you'll notice how this path behind here butts right up against the mountains. There was a very large mountain there that I procrastinated a large amount on getting rid of, but something I would later do. You can also see how the rivers remain the same, as in the last episode I mentioned how I would not fill in any rivers or anything. So while it looks like I filled that in, that is just how it naturally spawned in the world. Alright, let's keep going. Now I did want to touch on something to show a mistake that I did. I forgot to put a trap door over here, or it could have broken. So I'm going to do that now. I apologize for that. And with that, that concludes the tour of the library. The library was constructed in 2020 as well. Once again, I do not remember the exact date. Now let's go down the stairs. And we're going to follow the pathway. The pathway leads us past some more gardens, of which are symmetrical, and leads us to 2 tree-lined lanes. Say that 10 times fast. And behind, we're first going to look at the large gardens. Once again, these gardens took me a very long time to figure out how to design. I just could not find a design that I was quite happy with, but I eventually settled on this, which I'm quite fond of now. Now, let's go down the tree-lined lane. Once again, I would like to highlight how each of these trees were built by hand. So I built each one of these trees because I felt as though it was the only way to get the best tree coverage. Now we approach the area of the temples. So, this is the first temple that you'll notice. This one is a direct comparison, or takes direct inspiration from the Parthenon in the Acropolis. This is where we're really going to tie into the idea of eyes. Now, if you give me 1 second, I'm going to remove the weather and set it to daytime. So, here's where I really start to experiment with this idea or the motif of eyes. If you can notice from the top, there's a large eye here watching you. And I want that to be a take on what is religion. This is a temple after all. So is religion God watching you? Are you watching God? Or are you watching each other? And I really want the people entering and the viewer to question this and really think of this relation they have on viewing people. It's something we take so much for granted, and yet these buildings rely so heavily on it. Let's enter. And we are going to look right here. I want you to take a moment and notice the gold, the lapis. And if we look down, you'll also see the gold, lapis, and emeralds. This is the first building where I'm using these precious metals and something in Minecraft considered to be very expensive. I really wanted this to feel luxurious and very, very expensive. I wanted it to feel I wanted it to feel above the rest of the world. After all, it is a temple. So then we enter, and you're met once again with that same wood, but the entire floor this time is not quartz, but instead those precious metals. You'll notice the use of different trapdoors. So I'm now using the rainforest oak. I don't remember what the tree specifically is called. Those trapdoors. You'll notice the iron trapdoors being used, which is also explaining why the walls are so thick, is you had to get room to get a lever behind. The lights are also redstone lamps instead of glowstone or worm lights. So that makes it a little bit nicer of a hue, except when you get to the top where it turns into glowstone at the chandeliers. You'll notice that the roof is very shallow and is not very deep, as I elected to use a 2-block roof line instead of a singular block roof line. The other thing I want to look at is the use of pillars. When building this, I had originally used a single block wide pillar, but once I put in all the pillars, I felt as though it looked too scrawny and that it wasn't strong enough to hold up this massive roof. So I experimented now with a 2x2 pillar, which I decided to go with, and that is the first use of my 2x2 pillars. You'll also notice a fountain here as a simple way to break up the path. Then we look at I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. We forgot to look to see when this was built. This was built in 2021. We are no longer necessarily following the path in the time span that I built everything, and we're now just breaking it up into the different genres and different sections that I built the world. So we're going into the art section. So some of these buildings might be a little younger or a little older, but we're simply going to dive it through the different subsections of this world. We now have our other palace, or temple, I should say. This is a 4-technically story temple with a dome that has another floor and 2 on it. We'll go and look at it now. The inside is a beautiful red with the same lights, with that oak design from the library. You have pillars holding up this dome, and then a simple floor. We'll look underneath, and you'll notice the same idea of these wealth and, this luxurious items. Another thing I would like to highlight here is the fencing that goes around, and it's actually the same fencing from the 3rd floor in the old palace. It's a design that I struck, and I really liked how it looked, and I thought, why not use it again? I think it really eloquently shows and creates a very nice fencing while feeling open. You'll notice the levers, which I had to use for the trapdoors. It's not keeping the lights on, but instead keeping the trapdoors down. And I decided to live with the idea of these levers sticking out, as I'm not up here very often and they're very hard to see from above. And so instead, you see them just from below. I'm not sure why this trapdoor is open. Perhaps because it's missing a lever. Let me fix that. I'm sorry, you're noticing a lot of mistakes in the world that isn't normally there. I apologize. Now, the one thing about this temple that I don't enjoy very much is I never designed stairs or a way to get in between each floor. And I decided, once I built it, that I would not include an area to get to the next level, or to include stairs, because I liked the way it looked too much without adding stairs, and I thought it would take away from the design. There's also a reason that I chose to do 3 floors, and that's because of the blue lapis, green emerald, and the yellow gold. There were 3 of them, and I wanted each of them to be only of that color. So you'll notice the base floor is only going to be blue. The next floor is only green. And then I bet you can guess what's next. It's only gold. I did this also because my favorite number is 3, and I wanted a temple that signified what I liked, which is those 3. It also goes from yellow, green, and blue, because when you mix yellow and blue, you get green, which is in the middle. One thing I really like is how the columns look, and how it feels like these columns are going through the floor and yet holding everything up so strong. I like the shadows and how it plays on the top here. The floor feels so bright, and yet the top feels so dark, but you can still see where you're going. That concludes the tour of this temple. And finally, the temple was made on May 31st of 2021. And this is called Temple 2. So you can imagine this temple was built shortly before May, but also after the library. Now, there is one more thing I want to cover before we end this episode, and that is the garden, the Zen garden. You can see the back of the gardens here. So let's go in. This was built in 2020. It's called the Relaxing Garden. It was built in conjunction with the library and was built shortly after. So when you enter, you'll notice that there's something different about this. There's color, and they're not in pots, which we mentioned and really spent a large amount of time on in the first episode. And that's because I want this tree line here, which encompasses the entire relaxing garden, as well as a garden wall. I want it to separate you from the other world. I want you to feel like you're escaping it and really diving into this idea of nature. So, I also wanted to leave behind this idea of control and let the plants and flowers grow exactly as they do in nature. Don't get me wrong, they're still manicured and they still follow a design, but instead they can be free to grow wherever they want in the block. The trees on the outside, since they are on the other side of the garden wall, are still identical and built by hand. But all of the trees in here are used with one of the spawn saplings. So I did not build these trees by hand on the inside, as I wanted them to feel natural. I did selectively choose which ones I kept and didn't, and did destroy them and rebuild them, or I guess I should say regrow them when I was given a tree I wasn't happy with. But overall, I did not build these trees. You'll also notice our path here, which is consistent of 4 different materials, all to show this gray, like the gray look. I wanted to do this so that way it all blends in, while also feeling very similar and cohesive. The benches are made of purple, a hint into this color. There's a large pond in the middle with fish and sea turtles and coral and lily pads, once again bringing in this color. We're going to walk around and look at these gardens now. You can see very manicured gardens. But I think you can also see why I did not like how the gardens looked in the old palace grounds. While they're all on the same block line, they do not create a nice straight line. You can see the tulips here, the peonies. Another bench. Then we come over here to the raised gardens. This is supposed to signify the tree of importance or a tree of significance, since it's in the middle, overlooking everything. Once again, there's more raised gardens and ferns. There's lily of the valleys and some of our fish. Now, one thing I want to look at before we leave is the bridge. Let's cross the bridge. On the bridge, there's another pagoda-esque thing with roses covering everything. And then, finally, one of the roses in the middle, with a light on top that turns on at night. I really like how this turns out, with the use of the trap doors, making it feel open yet still entrapped. Then with the columns and the wood, I think this is one of the best builds that I've done for one of the miniature builds. The other thing I want to show is, let's make it daytime real quick. Whoops. And then let's make it nighttime. If you flip the switch here, or the trapdoor, there's a lever here. And I don't know if you noticed while I was walking around, but there were these trapdoors with redstone lamps underneath. So if we flick that switch, we can turn on the lights for the garden, so that way it stays on all night, keeping it well lit. Before we end this episode, there's one other thing I want to look at, and that takes us back to the temple area. Now, think back to that eye motif, and I know we're still freshly talking about this, and we haven't dove deep into this topic yet. But while you're at this temple area, you're going to notice the gardens get very high here, and it's supposed to make you feel smaller and insignificant, but it's also me trying to play with the forced perspective, where it's supposed to make these temples feel a lot larger than they actually are. I also want you to feel smaller with these, of course, and that leads into the insignificance, where I want you to question once again, what is your role within these temple spaces, within religion? And then you turn around, and you're met with pairs of sunflowers. Each of these pairs signifies a set of eyes looking at you, and it goes on for as long as you can see. And when you're here, it just feels like you're being followed. And I want you to think, and I want you to let me know what you think. Is this the eyes staring at you? Or are they staring at religion? I'm not sure. I'll leave that up to you. And I think it depends really on the day, if these sunflowers are staring at me, or if they're staring at religion. I hope you enjoyed the tour. This concludes episode 2 of Tour My Minecraft World, where here we toured the art area. Thank you.